It was late spring 2015 up in the Appalachian foothills where I'd been hunting since my grandfather first took me out at 12. I was 43 then, living alone after the divorce, checking on the old family cemetery every few weeks like my father taught me. The trail cam was nothing special, a $60 unit from the hardware store meant to catch deer or maybe a black bear passing through. I set it up on a pine tree facing the graveyard, mostly out of habit. When I pulled the SD card that June morning and saw what was on it, I didn't call anyone. Not the sheriff, not my brother down in Asheville, nobody. I still have the footage on an old laptop in my closet. I've watched it maybe 4 times in 10 years. The thing is, the hardest part wasn't seeing it that first time. The hardest part was every night after, when I'd hear those 3 knocks and know exactly what was out there. The woods smelled like wet pine needles and rotting leaves that spring. Everything was green and overgrown, the kind of thick you get after heavy rains when the underbrush shoots up faster than you can walk through it. I'd been coming to this patch of mountains since I was a kid, knew every deer trail and spring creek, every old logging road that hadn't seen a truck in 30 years. The family cemetery sat on a small clearing about 2 miles from my cabin, just past where the county road turned to gravel and disappeared into the trees. My grandfather was buried there, so was his father, 8 graves total, all family going back to the 1890s when my great-great-grandfather homesteaded this land. We kept it up as best we could, cleared the weeds twice a year, replaced the wooden markers when they rotted through. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I set up the trail cam on a Tuesday afternoon. The air was thick and humid, the kind of weather where your shirt sticks to your back within minutes. I strapped the camera to a pine about 15 yards from the graves, angled it so it would catch anything moving through the clearing. Mostly I was hoping to see what kind of animals were using the area at night. Deer, raccoons, maybe a bear if I was lucky. That evening I sat on my porch with a beer, listening to the forest settle into darkness. Crickets started up around 8. Somewhere deeper in the woods, an owl called. The air cooled just enough to be comfortable. I remember thinking it was a perfect night, the kind where nothing feels wrong. I didn't hear anything unusual. No knocks, no strange sounds, just the normal symphony of a mountain forest in late spring. 3 days later, I was sitting in my kitchen with coffee and an old Field and Stream magazine when I heard it. 3 solid knocks, deep and deliberate, like someone hitting a baseball bat against a hollow tree. They came from the direction of the cemetery. I looked up from my magazine. The knocks echoed in my mind even after they stopped. Thump, thump, thump. Evenly spaced, maybe 2 seconds apart. I told myself it was a branch falling or maybe a woodpecker working on dead wood. But woodpeckers don't knock 3 times and then stop, and branches don't fall with that kind of rhythm. I went back to my coffee. The knocks didn't come again that night. The next morning, I drove my truck up the old logging road as far as it would go, then hiked the rest of the way to the cemetery. The forest was quiet except for birds and the occasional rustle of squirrels in the canopy. When I reached the clearing, everything looked normal. The graves were undisturbed, the wooden markers standing straight. No fresh tracks in the soft dirt around the clearing. I checked the trail cam. The indicator light showed it had been recording. I pulled the SD card, slipped it into my pocket, and headed back to the cabin. That afternoon, I plugged the card into my laptop. The camera had captured plenty of footage. Deer passing through at dusk, a raccoon nosing around one of the markers, a fox trotting across the clearing just before dawn. Normal stuff. I was about to close the program when I saw the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. The video was dark, lit only by the camera's infrared. At first I thought the motion sensor had triggered on nothing, just shadows and leaves. Then I saw movement near the back of the clearing. Something large was kneeling by my grandfather's grave. It was digging with its hands, moving dirt slowly and deliberately. The figure was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even while kneeling. Its shoulders were broad, covered in dark hair that showed up gray in the infrared. I could see its arms moving, scooping earth and setting it aside in small piles. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. The creature worked for almost 3 minutes, then stood up. That's when I realized how big it actually was. 8 feet tall, maybe more. It turned its head toward the camera, not looking at it directly, just scanning the area, and I saw the profile of its face. Flat nose, heavy brow. Definitely not human. Then it walked into the trees and disappeared. I replayed the footage 5 times. Each time I hoped I'd see something different, some explanation that made sense. A person in a costume, a trick of the shadows. Anything but what it actually was. But there was no mistake. I'd just captured footage of something I'd never believed in, never thought was real. I'd captured footage of Bigfoot. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the video in my mind, the way the creature moved, how its hands looked almost human as they worked the dirt, the casual way it stood and walked away, like it had done this 100 times before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that profile, that heavy brow catching the infrared light. By dawn, I'd convinced myself to go back to the cemetery. I needed to see the grave in daylight, needed to confirm what the camera had shown me. The hike took 20 minutes. The sun was just coming up, filtering through the pine trees in long golden shafts. Birds were singing. Everything felt normal, peaceful, like the kind of morning where nothing bad could possibly exist in these woods. The cemetery looked exactly as I'd left it. No fresh digging, no disturbed earth. I walked over to my grandfather's grave and knelt down. The ground was level, undisturbed. If something had been digging here, it had filled the hole back in perfectly. Then I saw the footprint. It was in soft mud near the edge of the clearing, half hidden by tall grass. The print was enormous, at least 17 inches long, maybe 6 inches wide. 5 toes, clearly visible. The impression was deep, pressing at least 2 inches into the mud. Whatever made this print was heavy. I pulled out my phone and took photos. The footprint, the grave, the surrounding area. Everything looked normal except for that single track. No other prints leading to or from it, just one perfect impression in the mud, like the creature had materialized there and then vanished. I thought about calling someone. The sheriff's office was 20 miles down the mountain. They had a non-emergency number. I could call, tell them I'd found strange tracks near my family cemetery, ask if they wanted to send a deputy up to look. But what would I say? That I'd captured Bigfoot on camera digging up my grandfather's grave? They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd think I was pulling some kind of hoax, trying to get attention or make money off fake footage. I put my phone away. The smell hit me as I was leaving, a thick, musky odor like wet fur and dirt. It hung in the air near the tree line, strong enough to make me stop walking. I'd been around bears before, hunted them with my father as a teenager. This wasn't bear smell. This was something else entirely, something I'd never encountered. I left the cemetery quickly, glancing back over my shoulder every few steps. The feeling of being watched pressed on my back like a physical weight. Whatever had been here last night, whatever had dug at that grave, it felt close. Too close. When I got back to the cabin, I locked the door, pulled all the curtains, and sat in the dark kitchen with the laptop open. I watched the footage one more time. The creature's hands moving through the dirt, its massive shoulders, the way it stood and walked away with that strange, purposeful gait. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't ignore it. And I sure as hell couldn't tell anyone about it. The knocks came back 4 nights later. I was on the porch again, same spot, same time of evening. The sun had just dropped behind the ridge, and the forest was settling into that brief quiet period between day creatures and night creatures. I had a beer in my hand and was trying not to think about the footage, trying to convince myself that I'd just move on and pretend it never happened. Then I heard them, 3 knocks, loud and clear, coming from the direction of the cemetery. Thump, thump, thump. I set down my beer. My hands were shaking. The knocks echoed through the trees, deliberate and unmistakable. This time they were closer than before, maybe only a half-mile away instead of 2 miles. I went inside, locked the door, and sat in the dark living room listening. The knocks didn't come again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there watching the cabin. I kept the lights off and sat by the window until midnight, scanning the tree line with a flashlight. Nothing moved except shadows and leaves. The next morning I drove to the cemetery again. I'd started going every few days, checking on the graves, looking for signs. The footprint had washed away in a rain shower, but the memory of it stayed sharp in my mind. This time when I reached the clearing, I knew immediately that something had changed. The smell was back, that thick, musky odor hanging in the air like fog. And near the tree line, I found a small pile of stones stacked carefully on a fallen log. 5 stones, each one placed deliberately on top of the other. They hadn't been there 3 days ago. I took photos. The stones, the clearing, everything. I didn't touch the stack, didn't disturb anything. I just documented it and left. That week, the knocks continued. Every few nights, always around the same time, always 3 of them. I started timing them, writing down when they occurred. 9:47 p.m., 10:15 p.m., 11:03 p.m. Never the same exact time, but always late evening, always after dark. I was drinking more than usual, sleeping less. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for knocks, listening for footsteps on the porch. My brother called from Asheville, and I told him everything was fine, just enjoying the quiet mountain life. He didn't need to know what was happening up here. One morning I found scratches on the cabin's back wall, 4 parallel marks gouged into the wood siding about 8 feet off the ground. Deep scratches, like something with claws had dragged its hand across the wall. I measured them. The marks were 7 inches long. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't call animal control. I just stood there in my backyard, looking at those scratches, knowing that something had been close enough to touch my cabin while I slept. The word kept circling in my mind, even though I didn't want to say it, didn't want to admit what I was dealing with. But there was no escaping it anymore. This was real. This was happening. And the creature in my woods, the thing making those knocks and leaving those signs, was Bigfoot. I spent hours online that week, reading everything I could find about Bigfoot encounters. Most of it was garbage, obvious hoaxes, blurry photos that could have been anything, wild speculation from people who'd never spent a day in real wilderness. But scattered among the nonsense were a few accounts that felt genuine. People who'd seen something in the woods and didn't know what to make of it. People who kept quiet because nobody would believe them. One forum thread caught my attention. A hunter in Northern California had reported finding graves disturbed in an old pioneer cemetery. He'd set up cameras and captured footage of a large figure moving through the graveyard at night, kneeling by the markers. The post was 5 years old. The hunter had never shared the actual footage, said he destroyed it because people called him a liar, and his life became hell. The thread was locked, comments filled with accusations of hoaxing. I read that thread 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and promised myself I'd never share my footage with anyone. The knocks continued through June. I got used to them the way you get used to a train passing near your house, that moment of attention, that pause in conversation, then back to normal. Except nothing about this was normal. I started checking the cemetery every other day. I'd hike up in the afternoon, spend an hour walking the clearing, looking for signs. Sometimes I'd find things, small stacks of stones, broken branches arranged in patterns, disturbed earth near the graves. Other times, everything looked untouched, like nothing had been there in weeks. The smell came and went. Some days it was so strong I could barely breathe near the tree line. Other days the forest smelled like normal pine and earth. I couldn't find a pattern. I couldn't predict when I'd encounter it, or when the clearing would be empty and quiet. One evening, I was sitting on my porch when my neighbor, Dale Patterson, pulled up in his pickup. Dale lived 5 miles down the mountain, ran a small sawmill operation. Good man, kept to himself mostly. He got out of his truck and walked up to the porch with a concerned look. "Heard you've been spending a lot of time up at the old cemetery," he said. "Everything all right with your family?" I told him everything was fine, just maintaining the graves like always. "That's good," Dale said. He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Listen, I don't want to sound crazy, but I've been hearing things at night. Knocks. 3 of them, always 3. Coming from up your way." My chest tightened. "You hear them too?" "Last couple weeks. Always late. Always the same pattern. My wife thinks it's trees falling, but I've logged these mountains for 30 years. I know what trees sound like when they fall. This is something else." We stood there in silence for a moment. I wanted to tell him about the footage, about the footprint, about everything I'd seen. But I couldn't. If I told Dale, he'd tell someone else, and soon the whole county would be up here with cameras and guns. "Probably just echo from the logging operation," I said. "Sound carries strange in these hollows." Dale nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He knew I was lying. He just didn't know why. After he left, I sat on the porch until dark. The knocks came again at 10:23 p.m. 3 solid thumps from the forest. I listened to them echo through the trees and thought about Dale hearing them 5 miles away, about how many other people might be hearing them, about how long I could keep this secret. July brought heat and humidity that made the forest feel like a greenhouse. The air was so thick you could almost drink it. I spent most days inside with the windows closed and a fan running, trying to stay cool. But every evening I'd go out to the porch and listen for the knocks. They didn't come as often anymore. Sometimes a week would pass without hearing them. I'd start to think maybe the creature had moved on, found somewhere else to be. Then I'd hear those 3 thumps in the night and know it was still out there. I stopped going to the cemetery as frequently, partly because of the heat, partly because I was starting to feel like I was intruding on something private. Whatever Bigfoot was doing at those graves, it wasn't hurting anyone. It was careful, deliberate, almost reverent. I'd watched the footage enough times to see that. The way it moved the dirt, the gentle way it touched the markers. It wasn't destroying anything. It was visiting. That realization changed something in me. I stopped being afraid. Or maybe I was still afraid, but in a different way. Afraid of what would happen if the wrong people found out. Afraid of hunters coming into these woods with rifles. One afternoon in late July, I was in town buying supplies when I overheard 2 men talking at the hardware store. They were discussing strange sounds in the mountains, possible bear activity, whether the county should increase patrols. I kept my mouth shut, bought my nails and wood stain, and left. The word Bigfoot hadn't been mentioned. Not yet. But I could feel the conversation tilting that direction, could sense people starting to notice things. In a small mountain community, strange sounds and unexplained signs don't stay secret for long. I drove home faster than I should have on those dirt roads, kicking up dust and gravel. When I got to the cabin, I pulled out the laptop and watched the footage again. The creature's profile in the infrared, the way it stood, the massive shoulders, the careful movements. I tried to see it as something else, a bear, a person, anything but what it obviously was. But there was no denying it. I'd captured proof of something people had been searching for, arguing about, obsessing over for decades. Real undeniable proof. And I was going to bury it. I copied the file to a flash drive, put the drive in a coffee can, and buried the can in my backyard under 2 feet of dirt. Then I deleted the file from the laptop and the SD card. No cloud backup, no copies, no trail. The only evidence left was in that can underground and in my memory. That night the knocks came again, louder than before, clear and strong. They sounded almost triumphant, like the creature knew what I'd done. I stood on my porch in the dark and called out into the forest. "I won't tell anyone," I said. My voice sounded small against the vast silence of the trees. "You can trust me." The forest stayed quiet. No response, no more knocks, just crickets and distant owls, and the rustle of leaves in a hot July breeze. I went inside and locked the door. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without waking up to listen for sounds in the darkness. August came with thunderstorms, big mountain storms that rolled in every afternoon, turning the sky purple and dropping enough rain to flood the creek beds. I'd sit on the covered porch and watch lightning strike the ridges, counting seconds between flash and thunder. One evening during a particularly fierce storm, the power went out. I lit candles and sat in the kitchen, listening to rain hammer the roof. The wind was howling through the trees, branches scraping against the cabin walls. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks, barely audible under the storm, but unmistakable. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. The beam cut through rain and darkness, illuminating nothing but trees bending in the wind. I stood there for 5 minutes, scanning the forest, seeing nothing. The next morning, after the storm passed, I hiked to the cemetery. The trail was muddy, every creek crossing swollen with runoff. When I reached the clearing, I stopped dead. Something had been there. And this time, it hadn't just dug at the graves. It had left something behind. On my grandfather's marker sat a woven basket. Not modern, not something from a store. It was made from thin branches and vines, woven together in a tight pattern. Inside the basket were wildflowers, black-eyed Susans and mountain laurel, both freshly picked. I approached slowly, like I was walking into a church. The basket was crude but functional, clearly made by hand. By hands. The flowers were arranged carefully, deliberately. This wasn't random. This was an offering. I picked up the basket. It was surprisingly sturdy. Whoever made this, and I knew exactly who made it, had skill. The weaving was tight, no gaps, symmetrical. I turned it over in my hands, examining every detail. That's when I noticed the smell again. Strong, close, the musky odor of wet fur and earth. I spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but I knew it was there. I could feel eyes on me, watching from somewhere in the thick forest. "Thank you," I said aloud. My voice cracked. "Thank you for the flowers." The forest stayed silent. A crow called somewhere distant. Wind rustled through pine branches, normal forest sounds. But the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and undeniable. I left the cemetery with the basket, carrying it carefully down the trail. When I got home, I set it on my kitchen table and stared at it for an hour. Real physical proof. Not footage I'd buried, not footprints that washed away. This was something I could hold, something undeniably real. That evening, I took the basket back to the cemetery and placed it on the grave where I'd found it. If Bigfoot had left it as an offering, then that's where it should stay. I wasn't going to take that away from whatever connection existed between this creature and my family's buried dead. The knocks came that night at 11:47 p.m. Just 3, like always. But they sounded different this time. Not threatening, not warning. Almost like an acknowledgement. I stood on my porch in the darkness and raised my hand in a small wave toward the forest. "I understand," I said quietly. "I won't disturb you." The creature didn't respond, but I felt something shift between us, some unspoken agreement forming in the mountain night. It would continue its visits. I would continue keeping the secret. And we would both protect these woods from the people who would turn this place into a circus if they knew what was here. September brought cooler nights and the first hints of fall color. The leaves hadn't started turning yet, but you could feel autumn coming in the morning chill, in the angle of the sun. I'd been living with the secret for almost 4 months now. 4 months of knocks, of checking the cemetery, of lying to neighbors about what I'd heard and seen. Dale Patterson stopped by again in early September. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Still hearing those knocks," he said, not bothering with pleasantries this time. "My wife can't sleep. We called the sheriff's office, asked if they'd send someone up to investigate." My stomach dropped. What did they say? "They sent a deputy. He drove around for an hour, didn't find anything. Said it was probably hunters or kids playing pranks." Dale looked at me hard. "But I know you know something. You're up there all the time. You've seen something." I wanted to tell him, wanted to show him the footage, explain about the basket and the flowers and the creature that visited graves in the night. But I couldn't. Dale was a good man, but he'd talk. He wouldn't be able to help himself. And once word got out, this mountain would be swarming with reporters and researchers and yahoos looking for fame. "I haven't seen anything unusual," I said. The lie tasted like ash. "Just maintaining the family plots." Dale stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, disappointed. "All right, if you say so." He left without another word. I watched his truck disappear down the dirt road and hated myself for lying to him. But what choice did I have? The truth would destroy everything: the peace of these woods, the creature's safety, my own quiet life. That evening I hiked to the cemetery. The basket was still there on my grandfather's grave, the flowers long since wilted, but still arranged in their careful pattern. I knelt by the marker and ran my hand over the earth. "I'm sorry I have to keep you secret," I said to the empty clearing. "I wish I could tell people. I wish they'd understand." A branch snapped behind me. I turned. Standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the late afternoon shadows, was Bigfoot. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, broad shoulders covered in dark reddish-brown hair. Its face was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could see its eyes, dark, intelligent, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not aggressive, not threatening, just watching. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't move, didn't run. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and hoping for since I first saw the footage. The creature took one step forward, then another. It moved with that strange, fluid gait, almost human but not quite, something primal and ancient in the way it carried itself. It stopped about 20 feet from me, close enough that I could see the texture of its hair, the rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. I slowly stood up. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not show fear. "I won't tell," I said. My voice came out as a whisper. "You're safe here." The creature tilted its head slightly, like it was listening or understanding. Then it made a sound, low and rumbling, almost like a purr, but deeper. The sound vibrated in my chest. It turned and walked back into the forest. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the thick underbrush, moving with barely a sound despite its massive size. I stood alone in the clearing as darkness fell, replaying those few minutes in my mind. I'd just had a face-to-face encounter with Bigfoot, and instead of fear, all I felt was awe. I didn't go back to the cemetery for a week after that encounter. I needed time to process what had happened, to wrap my mind around the fact that I'd stood 20 feet from a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. The knocks continued. Every few nights, regular as clockwork, but now they felt different, less like warnings and more like check-ins. The creature was telling me it was still here, still visiting the graves, still maintaining whatever connection it had to that patch of ground. I spent hours trying to understand what that connection could be. Why would Bigfoot visit human graves? Why would it leave offerings of flowers? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Unless the connection went back further than I realized. Further than my grandfather, further than the 1890s when my ancestors first homesteaded this land. Maybe this creature, or its ancestors, had been here long before humans built their cemetery. Maybe we were the ones intruding on something ancient. The thought made me uncomfortable. It flipped the whole situation around. Instead of Bigfoot being the intruder, maybe my family had built our cemetery on ground that was already sacred to something else. One evening in late September, as the leaves were just starting to turn, I heard a knock on my cabin door. Actual knocking, not the wooden thumps from the forest. I opened it to find a man I didn't recognize, maybe 45, clean cut, wearing hiking clothes that looked too new. "Evening," he said. "I'm Tom Breslin, wildlife researcher with the state. We've been getting reports of unusual activity in this area. Strange sounds, possible large predator signs. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" My blood went cold. I kept my face neutral. "Sure, what do you need to know?" "Have you seen or heard anything unusual lately? Bears behaving strangely? Unexplained sounds at night? Anything like that?" "Just the normal forest sounds," I lied. "Owls, coyotes, occasional black bear passing through." Breslin nodded, making notes on a clipboard. "We've had reports of some unusual vocalizations, 3 loud knocks in sequence, multiple witnesses. You heard anything like that?" "Trees falling," I said. "Happens all the time up here, especially after storms." He looked at me with professional skepticism. "These witnesses are experienced outdoorsmen. They know the difference between falling trees and something else." "Well, I haven't heard anything unusual." Breslin handed me his card. "If you do, please give me a call. We take wildlife activity seriously, especially when it involves possible human safety concerns." I took the card and promised to call if I saw anything. After he left, I tore the card into small pieces and burned them in my fireplace. The state was investigating. That meant time was running out. More researchers would come, more questions. Eventually, someone would set up their own cameras, would capture their own footage. The secret couldn't last forever. That night, I hiked to the cemetery in darkness, using only a small flashlight. When I reached the clearing, I turned off the light and stood in the blackness, letting my eyes adjust to starlight. "They're coming," I said to the empty forest. "People are going to start looking for you. You need to be more careful." The forest stayed silent. No knocks, no sounds, nothing. Maybe the creature wasn't here tonight. Maybe it had already sensed the danger and moved deeper into the wilderness. Then I heard it, that low rumbling sound, the same one from our encounter. It came from somewhere to my left, close enough that I could feel it vibrate through the ground. "I'm sorry," I said. "I tried to protect you. I kept the secret, but I can't control what other people do." The rumbling sound came again, softer this time. Then silence. I stood in the darkness for another hour, waiting. But the creature didn't show itself. When I finally hiked back to the cabin, I knew something had shifted. The delicate balance we'd maintained all summer was breaking down. Soon, I'd have to make a choice: continue lying and risk the secret coming out anyway, or take more drastic action to protect what lived in these woods. October brought early snow to the high ridges. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to tell you winter was coming. I'd started preparing the cabin for cold weather, stacking firewood, checking the chimney, making sure I had enough supplies to last through a heavy snow. The knocks had stopped. 2 weeks without hearing them. The cemetery sat empty every time I checked. No new signs, no baskets, no flowers. Just old graves and fallen leaves. I told myself the creature had moved on, found somewhere safer, somewhere without researchers asking questions. But I couldn't shake the worry that something had happened to it. Tom Breslin came back twice more, each time with different questions. Had I heard any unusual vocalizations, seen any large footprints, noticed any wildlife behaving strangely? I gave him nothing, just shrugs and denials. He was getting frustrated. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like he knew I was hiding something but couldn't prove it. The third week of October, Dale Patterson called. "You need to come down to my place," he said. "Bring a gun." I drove down the mountain faster than I should have. When I pulled up to Dale's house, he was standing on his porch with a rifle. "Something came through last night," he said. "Tore down part of my fence, knocked over my woodpile. Big tracks everywhere." We walked to the fence line. The damage was extensive. Posts snapped like toothpicks, wire torn and twisted. And in the mud were footprints. Huge footprints, 17 inches long, 5 clear toes, deep impressions showing massive weight. Dale stared at the tracks. "That ain't no bear." "Could be a person with fake feet," I said weakly. "You know, kids playing a prank." "Kids didn't snap those posts. Look at them. They're 8-inch diameter pine logs set 3 feet deep. Whatever did this had the strength of 3 men." I took photos of the tracks, knowing I'd never show them to anyone. "You call the sheriff?" "Not yet. Wanted you to see first." Dale looked at me. "You know what this is. I can see it in your face." I stood there in his yard, surrounded by evidence I couldn't explain away. The tracks were undeniable. The damage was real. And Dale was smart enough to know I'd been lying to him all along. "If I tell you," I said slowly, "you have to promise me something. No cops, no reporters, no posting on social media. Just between us." Dale nodded. "I promise." So I told him about the footage, about the months of knocks, about the basket and the encounter in the cemetery. I told him everything except where I'd buried the evidence. That stayed my secret. When I finished, Dale sat down on his porch steps. He looked pale. "Bigfoot," he said quietly. "You're telling me Bigfoot is real and it's been living on this mountain?" "It's real. I've seen it. And it's not dangerous. It's just trying to live its life. But if word gets out, this place will be swarmed with hunters and researchers and idiots with cameras." "So what do?" "We protect it," I said. "We keep lying. We fix your fence, clean up the tracks, and pretend this never happened." Dale thought for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but I want to see it, just once. I want proof." "I don't know if that's possible. It's been gone for 2 weeks. I think it knows people are looking." We spent the rest of that afternoon repairing Dale's fence and covering the tracks with fresh dirt. When we finished, you couldn't tell anything unusual had happened. That night, lying in my bed, I heard them. 3 knocks, clear and strong, coming from the direction of Dale's place, like the creature knew what we'd done and was acknowledging it. I got up and went to the window. The forest was dark, moonless. But somewhere out there, Bigfoot was still alive, still watching over its territory. And now 2 of us were helping protect its secret instead of just one. November was deer season. The woods filled with hunters from down in the valley, men in orange vests tracking through the forest with rifles. I stayed close to the cabin, kept the cemetery off limits, and listened for knocks that didn't come. Dale and I had an understanding now. He'd check his property, I'd check mine, and if either of us saw signs, we'd cover them before anyone else could find them. It felt like we were running interference, protecting something that didn't know it needed protecting. One morning, I found Tom Breslin at my cabin again. This time, he wasn't alone. He had 2 other men with him, both carrying equipment cases. "We're setting up some monitoring stations in the area," Breslin said. "Audio recorders, motion cameras, thermal sensors. The state approved a full investigation." "Investigation of what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what. "Possible undocumented large primate activity." He said it straight-faced, like it was a normal thing. "We have enough credible reports to warrant serious study." I felt my chest tighten. "You're not setting anything up on my land." "We don't need permission for state forest land. Your property line is clear. We'll stay off it." He gestured at the mountain above my cabin. "Everything past that ridge is fair game." They spent 3 days installing their equipment. I watched from my porch helpless. When they finally left, I hiked up to check the cemetery. They'd placed a camera 30 yards from the clearing, angled perfectly to capture anything approaching the graves. That night, I went back with wire cutters and a hammer. I destroyed the camera, smashed the memory card, and buried the pieces. If they asked, I'd blame vandals or bears. It wouldn't stop them forever, but it might buy time. The knocks came that night, softer, more cautious. The creature knew the danger had increased. December arrived with heavy snow. The state researchers stopped coming as often, the roads too treacherous for their vehicles. I settled into a winter routine, keeping the cabin warm, checking the cemetery when the weather allowed, listening for sounds in the long, dark nights. One evening, Dale called. "Got something you need to see." I drove down carefully, the truck sliding on icy roads. When I arrived, Dale led me to his barn. Inside, scratched into the frozen mud floor, was a symbol. 4 parallel lines with a cross through them. Simple, but deliberate. "Found it this morning," Dale said. "Whatever made it pushed through 2 feet of snow to get into my barn." We stared at the symbol. It looked almost like language, like the creature was trying to communicate something. "What do you think it means?" Dale asked. "I don't know. Maybe a warning, maybe a message." I took a photo with my phone, knowing I'd study it for months trying to understand. That night, I sat in my cabin with the photo on my laptop screen, analyzing every line. The creature was trying to tell us something. It knew we were protecting it, and it was responding in the only way it could. The knocks came at midnight, 3 solid thumps, then silence. I put on my coat and boots and went outside. The snow was falling thick and heavy, covering everything in white. I walked to the edge of my property, to the tree line where civilization ended and wilderness began. "I hear you," I called into the darkness. "I understand." For a moment there was only wind and falling snow. Then I saw it, a massive shadow moving between the trees about 50 yards out. Just a glimpse, there and gone. But enough to know it was watching. I raised my hand in a wave. The shadow didn't move. We stood there in the winter night, man and Bigfoot, separated by distance and species, but connected by something neither of us fully understood. Finally, the shadow turned and moved deeper into the forest. I watched until it disappeared completely, then trudged back through the snow to my cabin. It's been almost 10 years since that spring when I first set up the trail camera. I moved away from the mountain 5 years ago, sold the cabin to a young couple from Atlanta who wanted a quiet place to raise their kids. I didn't tell them about the knocks or the creature or the secret Dale and I had kept. Some things are better left buried. I live in town now, down in the valley where cell phones work and the grocery store is 10 minutes away instead of an hour. Normal life. Safe life. But I still think about those woods every day. Still wonder if Bigfoot is up there. Still visiting the graves. Still watching over that old cemetery. Dale passed away 3 years ago. Heart attack while working at his sawmill. At his funeral, his wife pulled me aside and said Dale had made her promise something, that she'd never sell their property, never let developers near it, never let anyone turn that mountain into a tourist trap. She honored that promise. The land stays wild. The coffee can is still buried in the backyard of my old cabin. The new owners don't know it's there, don't know what it contains. Sometimes I think about going back, digging it up, finally sharing what I captured, but I never do. The promise I made that summer night still holds. Last week I drove up the mountain for the first time in 5 years, just to see the old place, check on the cemetery. The dirt roads were overgrown, the forest thicker than I remembered. When I finally reached the clearing, I found it exactly as I'd left it. The graves maintained, the markers straight. Someone had been caring for them. On my grandfather's marker sat a basket, woven branches and vines, just like the one from years ago. Inside were fresh wildflowers. I stood there for a long time, remembering everything. The knocks, the footage, the night we stood in the snow watching each other. All of it felt like a dream now, something from another life. As I was leaving, I heard them. 3 knocks from deep in the forest, faint but unmistakable. I smiled and kept walking. Some secrets are worth keeping. Some creatures deserve their peace, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Bigfoot is still up there. I'm sure of it. Still watching over those graves, still living in the spaces between the trees where humans don't think to look. And I hope it stays that way forever, hidden, protected, free. That's the end of my story. That's all I'm willing to say. If you don't believe me, I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe me either if I hadn't lived it.